Good afternoon, everyone. I'll say hello to the people who've already been able to join us. We still have a little bit of time left, so we'll wait for people to slowly come in. There's still people in the waiting room. As always, people tend to come in at the last minute, so we'll be very patient and let them come in. At the moment, there are 3 people in the waiting room. Yeah, they've joined. Okay, we'll start on time because we want to finish on time for you to be able to continue with your afternoon. I hope you have a sandwich or something to drink because this is now the lunchtime here in Switzerland, in Hong Kong, where Iris Leung is joining us from. It's after 7 in the evening. So a very warm welcome on behalf of Mission 21 to everyone who's joining us. I'm really happy to see that people are joining us from all over the world. This is wonderful. My name is Claudia Bues. I am part of the education team here at Mission 21. I'm in charge of educational events such as this webinar series, Mission Colonialism Revisited. And I'm extremely pleased to welcome you to the first webinar in 2023. And I'm looking forward to our talk today, which will focus on the Basel mission in Hong Kong during the First World War. Great to see so many of you here on the screens. If you would like to, you can drop us a hello in the chat and indicate where you're from. It's always nice to read people's greetings and where they're from. But first, before I start, I would like to warmly welcome our speaker today, Iris Leung Chuiwa. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, more or less. As I said, she's joining us live from Hong Kong. She will share with us some of her PhD research on German missions in Hong Kong during World War I. She only just recently finished and submitted her thesis, so this is brand new, off the press, and she's waiting for her final examination, which will probably take place at the end of March. So a heartfelt hello to you, Iris. It's lovely to have you with us today, and congratulations on your thesis. And I'm looking forward to hearing about your research on the Basel mission in Hong Kong during World War I. I would also like to introduce the members of the team that are supporting me in the running of this webinar and also in the preparation of the webinar. It is Christian Weber, my colleague in the education team, and Monica Di Pietrantonio, who's also our coordinator. If you have any questions about the technical side of things, you can write directly to them in the chat and they'll see if they can help you out. Then, of course, one of the very important persons tonight, besides Iris, is Timo Vettiger. He's our interpreter, and he will translate from English into German and also the other way round. So if you're looking for a German translation, it's at the bottom of your screen. You see this globe icon. And if you click on it, you can choose the language. So if you would like to have German, you can choose German, or if you would like to have English, you can choose English. Okay, let's have a look at the chat box. Yeah, so people are, from East Indonesia. That's great. Beijing, we have someone from Beijing. Hello. People from Beijing, wonderful to see you. London, and of course Hong Kong, and from Kenya, and Ikiara, a friend from Kenya who's joining us regularly. Lovely to see every one of you. We have people from Basel and Zurich, of course. This is really wonderful. Okay, I just want to say a few things before Iris will start about the background of this webinar series. Many of you know that we have been participating, many of you, sorry, we have been doing this webinar series for the last 2 years, and many of you who have been participating regularly know that Mission 21, who is a faith-based development organization in Basel, has been bringing the multi-layered history of Christian missions in the context of colonialism into focus. And doing this, we're adopting a global history perspective. This allows us to learn from our history as a former missionary organization established during colonial times for current social debates on racism and discrimination. This is, of course, an ongoing learning journey, and in order to be able to understand and to move forward in the present, we want to make sense of the past through this historical fact-finding mission. The questions we ask ourselves are, what can we learn from the past regarding unequal power constellations, racism and discrimination for our relationships with our partners in the global South today? And how do we put into practice what we've learned on this journey so far? So coming back to tonight's topic, which of course is not tonight's topic, but the lunchtime topic of this webinar, is the Basel Mission's work in China. As you might know, they sent their first missionaries to Hong Kong in 1847, 5 years after Hong Kong was established as a British colony. And then during the First World War, the Basel Mission faced considerable difficulties when it was officially classified as the British Empire's enemy, and its missionaries were prevented from working and its assets were seized by the authorities. This also happened in other colonial territories occupied by the British Empire, for example, in India, Cameroon, or Ghana, where the Basel Mission was also working. So Iris Leroux-Chuiwa will explain the reasons for the colonial government's aggressive policy and demonstrate how the Basel Mission's absence from Hong Kong then contributed to speeding up the independence of the indigenous Chinese churches. So much said about the background of the webinar. Now I am very pleased to introduce our speaker. Iris retired early from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2010, and she then decided to take a new path by returning to the university. She'd already done a Master of Arts in Business and Administration, and then she subsequently obtained an MA in Christian Studies from the China Graduate School of Theology in Hong Kong, and then a second MA with distinction in history from the SOAS University in London, a very prestigious school. And then in 2017, she started a joint PhD program at the University of Hong Kong and King's College London, and has recently submitted her thesis on the German missions in Hong Kong during World War I, and she will talk about this topic now. Very welcome, Iris. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for your introduction. You know, I'm a bit embarrassed when you talk so long about my background. Today is my big day. I'm so happy to share with you my work, which is related to the German missions in Hong Kong during the First World War. But because of the time limit, today I will only focus on the Basel Mission and its experience in Hong Kong. Well, let me share the slide first. Please let me know if you can see it. Is it okay? Is it okay? You see the slide? Good. Okay. So today's my presentation will have the 3 parts. The first one is about the Basel Mission Global Ministry and the effect of the First World War. Secondly, I will talk about the Basel Mission China Ministry and the strategic position of Hong Kong. And finally, I will talk about the Hong Kong's colonial government's attitude towards the Basel mission and the other 3 German missions, I will argue that economic factor is the major factor shaping their attitudes. Before I start, I would like to explain first why the Basel mission, which is registered in Switzerland, was classified as a German mission. Well, I think you all know the Basel mission was built on the efforts of both Swiss and Germans, and its German elements is very visible in its workforce, in its source of funds, and also in its management and the supporting community. So when the war started, the British government very quickly identified that the Basel mission's workers, especially in the German colony, actually helped the German army by providing funds and also supplies. They also found that the Basel Mission seminary students, many of them fought for the German forces in the battlefield. And they also found the pro-German sermons delivered by the Basel Mission directors in Switzerland. So just like the British consuls in Switzerland continues to stress to the colonial office, the Basel Mission is a German institution under a Swiss clock. So therefore, at the British government offered a suggestion to the Basel Mission, saying that if you remove all German from your staff members, from your management and your membership, then we will allow you to continue to stay in our British territories and continue your work. However, the suggestion was rejected by the Basel Mission members because they would not terminate the fellowship built up for so many years in mission work. So as a result, the Basel Mission was classified officially as an enemy of the British Empire. Well, this is a big issue to the Basel Mission. Why? Because as I show here in the chart, you will see that majority of the global mission work of the Basel Mission were located in British territories, including Cameroon, the Gold Coast, and India. The only foreign missions fields not in British soil is China. But China is relatively small in terms of number of workers, numbers of church members, and number of students. Okay, so the being classified as an empire enemy led to the expulsions and internments of Basel Mission's workers in British territories, and also their assets being acquired by the local authorities. To the Basel Mission, they say it was a robbery of assets and missionary rights. It was a violence of the world power over an evangelical mission. Well, you may ask what have been done by the British and American missions. Well, during the war, they tried to provide support. And in fact, their support, I would argue, very important in keeping the German missions work around the world. They basically provide 4 kinds of support. The first is the financial aid. They deliver to the orphan German stations when all the flows of funds were stopped during the war. And secondly, they send out missionaries to help supervise and care the local church in the foreign fields for the German missions no longer there. And they also lobby the government and defend the neutrality of German missionaries in the public. And finally, when the war was ended and the British policy allowed the return of German missions. These allied nations missions sponsor the application of German missions to return to their old field. In fact, just like the records in the Basel missions, they say the help of the London Missionary Society, which actually helped them to return to India, would be inscribed for all the pages of the Basel mission history. I wish I have time to talk more about the war's effect or the international help provided to German missions, but we do not have time. So I would suggest maybe you can read these reference materials, which especially I will recommend Faith on the Frontier, A Life of J.H. Oldham, or the actually there is a major versions in the Basel Missions classic history book about this period. There are also other historians' work that talk about this. So today I only talk about Hong Kong. So that brings us, actually, I need to tell you that after the war, the termination of the war doesn't mean the end of the exiles of German missions, or they can get back the assets or go back to their mission fields. Why? It was because at the request of the British traders, the nationalists, and also the general public, who were quite fear of the Germans after the war, there were the British government introduced a series of restrictions on German missions. First, they banned all the admissions of German subjects into British territories for 3 years after the war. Secondly, they at the Paris conference of the peace treaty, an article was added to give all the German missions assets in British and Allied territories to the British missions societies. That means they will be kept and managed by these British trustees rather than given back to the German missions. And finally, they also set up a new control regime to restrict the operations of foreign missionaries in British territories. So, in fact, even after the British Empire say in 1924, they say we no longer discriminate the German missionaries from others' nationality. They still allowed the colonial authorities to decide when and on what condition the German mission can return to their foreign fields, and that is exactly why in Hong Kong the Hong Kong government can do so many things to stop the return of German missions. So I will talk about that later. So that brings us to the second part, which is the mission work in China. So I would say that the beginning of the Basel mission work in China all went back to one individual, Karl Gustav. He was an independent Lutheran Hong Kong governor. Realizing the massive demands for gospel in China, he invited the continental missions to join him to spread the gospel in China. The Basel missions react to this invitation by sending Theodor Hamburg and also Rudolf Leckler to Hong Kong on 19 March 1847. On the same ship were 2 missionaries from the Ranish mission. So the Basels and the Ranish missionaries work and live with the Chinese pastors from the pictures from the very beginning. they spread Christianity mainly in the remote village in Guangdong. Here, as you see, the red shape is Guangdong province of China. This is where the Basel missions work mainly in its China ministry. As the advice of the Gustav, the Basel mission focused its work among the Hakka people. Hakka speaking Chinese literally mean guest families. Their ancestor came from the northern part of China, escaping from the war and also the persecutions. They mainly settled in the poorest remote area of the Guangdong province. And they actually live in villages like this, with a big wall. There's no window. Why? It was built to keep the community safe, keep the possible attack by the Puntis, the Cantonese. So maybe because of this inferior social status of the Hakka people, they were particularly receptive to the Christianity and the offering of education and medical service provided by the Basel mission. At the same time, the very close ties between Hakka's families actually also allow the rapid expansions of Christianity within the Hakka community. So therefore, after decades of effort, the Basel mission built up a large Christian congregations among the Hakka people. I would say the Basel mission brought immense changes to the Hakka community, particularly in the welfare of the Hakka girls. They provide girl education. They also ban the child marriage. All this has a major impact on the lives of many Hakka girls. The first girls' school was established in Hong Kong at the ground floor of its mission house in 1862. It moved to the inland China in 1891 until it closed in 1985. If you go to Shenzhen today, you will still see the old buildings of this girls' school. It is now a museum and a galleries operated by the Shenzhen government. Inside the buildings, they display. Here you will see this building surrounded by all these high-rise. Inside the building, they display artifacts and exhibits related to the past of this building as a mission school of the Basel mission. Likewise, the two Basel missions hospitals in Guangdong, they still exist and operate, continue to serve the Chinese. The one in Meixian, which was built in 1893, is now called Meizhou People's Hospital. The other one in Hoyuan, which was built in 1908, is now the Hoyuan People's Hospital. So at the outbreak of the war, the Basel mission already established all these hospitals and schools in China. I tell you, they had 19 mission stations in China at that time, operating 1,374 churches with 12,000 communion Christians. They run 112 schools with over 5,000 students. They also have one seminary and 2 hospitals, as I just said. Hong Kong was the smallest amongst the 19 stations. It only had 7 churches with 700 Christians. There were 4 primary schools with 340 students. However, Hong Kong has very strategic importance to the Basel mission's China. Because of its strategic location geographically and its unique status as a British colony, Hong Kong becomes the gateway to China. All the missionaries pass through Hong Kong when they go to China or leave China. Hong Kong is also the safe house when there's troubles in China. So they will run to Hong Kong for shelters or when they are sick. Hong Kong was also the place where they managed the logistic, the funds, and the supplies of the missions ministry in China. And finally, there's also one very important point for Hong Kong. It is the income source. Because there is a special practice of the Basel missions, it invests in properties in Hong Kong so that it can generate monthly rentals to support the ministry in the mainland. Here are the pictures of some mission properties in Hong Kong. Not just the Basel mission have properties. Others missions, German mission, also have properties. So, in fact, this table gives you a glimpse of the size of portfolios of the German missions properties in Hong Kong. You will see that the Basel mission owned the largest number of properties. It also is the most valuable portfolios among the four. However, the Berlin Women's Missions for China, which only owns one property, however, the value is very substantive. And that is why, as I explain later, it becomes the first target of the Hong Kong government when they try to acquire the German missions property. At the outbreak of the war, Hong Kong has four German missions. Apart from the Basel and the Rhenish mission, there was the Berlin Ladies Mission for China and also the Hildesheim mission for the blind. The Berlin Women Missions operate the founding house. Here are some pictures for your reference. You will see the founding home are the sweet home for young baby of Chinese. There are also older girls. So in fact, it was a founding home and also a girls' school. For the Hildesheim mission, they run a blind girls' school and also a blind women's workshop. So I would say that when the war hit these four German missions, in fact, it was not that bad during the war. Why? Because during the wartime, which is from 1914 to 1918, you can say, Hong Kong was governed by a sympathetic governor, Sir Francis May. Why I describe him as sympathetic? Well, there are a few reasons. First, he allowed the male German missionaries when London asked they must leave all the British territories. May oppose the military opposition, insist that the German missionaries, including the Basel missionaries, they can go to join their colleagues in China. Secondly, he convinced London to allow the female missionaries who look after the foundlings and the blind children to stay in Hong Kong, saying that they are needed to look after their work. When the funds are drying up, Sir May and his friend actually take money from his own pocket to fund the foundling home and the blind facilities until later on the government's money comes in. Well, I would say during the war, from the correspondence of the German women's missionaries staying in the colony, they were left to do their work. So basically, the founding homes and the blind schools and blind facilities continue just like a peaceful time, okay? how about the Chinese church relate to the Basel and the Venice mission? Well, during the war, they were under the supervision of the British missionaries in accordance with the government's order. In fact, the war may have done something good because it speed up the pace of self-management of this Chinese church. When the German pastors are no longer available, the local pastors and the elders took up the work to deliver holy communions and other rituals. During the war, the Germans' mission assets, including the rental income, were collected by professional receivers appointed by the government. But the Hong Kong government allowed the German missions to withdraw money from Hong Kong to continue to support the China ministry. The receiver also made regular updates on the status of the asset to the German missions. So one may say that during the wartime, the German missions were generally well treated by the Hong Kong government. Their mission work, their assets were intact largely, with the increasing financial support of the Chinese congregation and also a sympathetic governor. The real troubles came after the end of the war. When the governor May resigned due to his illness, Hong Kong was passed to Sir Klaus Stephen. He acted as the governor of Hong Kong until the arrival of the new governor, Sir Reginald Stopes, in 1919. So Klaus Stephen governed Hong Kong for 1 year, and then he passed on the job to Stopes. Both these gentlemen are different from May. They had no hesitation in removing the German missions permanently from the colony. And they had a very different agenda and approach in handling the German missions properties. And the reason was related to their interest in the substantial property portfolio I just mentioned. Just like today, Hong Kong was then facing a shortage of housing and property. Since the Xinhai Revolution in 1911, Hong Kong has become a shelter for many refugees from China, and housing rentals rocket and create many social problems. Even the government itself cannot find enough accommodations for its European employees. Properties in the mid-levels became the hottest item in the market. And you know what? The German missions properties, many of them, were located in the mid-levels, which was the prime residential area in the island. Here, this picture showed the site of the German missions, and you can see they are all very close to Bunham Road, which is just, we call the mid-levels, the highest rentals place, okay? And that means these properties are valuables. In 1916, when the British Empire asked all the colonies to submit a list of the German missions assets in their territories, Governor May submit a list of the German properties, German mission properties. In the list, he excluded all the mission properties for religious, educational, and charitable purpose in his value estimation. He also said this building were very old and could only be sold at a loss. He stressed that over 100 Chinese children were staying there and they need the premises. So therefore, of course, nothing was done to this German mission asset. However, in 1919, the same list was resubmitted by Stephen. In the list, he include and give estimate value to every single property of the German mission. He even indicate the price if it was if it would be redeveloped. I mean, bring down the original buildings and rebuild. Okay, he even gave an estimate for that redevelopment. And as if it is not enough, he added a note at the end of the table. There has been a large increase in the value of the land since 1916. So obviously, the Hong Kong government saw the German mission properties in a new way. But in order to do that, he needs to solve the problem of the foundrings and the blind girls. So Stephen, he sought help from the Anglican Church. Ernest Barnett, the archdeacon, he moved the young blind girls to Guangdong and put in a blind facility, so that the foundering homes, and then he moved the foundrings to the blind girls' school, so that the founding homes can be vacated and then converted by the government to a married police quarters. The government told Archdeacon Barnett of the Anglican Church, if these properties should be required for other purpose, the government reserved the right to further remove these children from the remaining properties of the German mission. I wish I have time to tell you the stories about these foundrings and the blind girls in Guangdong, but I couldn't. I can only say that the government's actions removed these children from the care of the German missionaries, and they lost their shelters in Hong Kong. And also the Berlin Women's Mission lost its properties and its foundrings during the process, and it has to withdraw from Hong Kong forever. The Hong Kong officials also transfer all German mission assets, to a trust called German Mission Trust. Since then, the Basel missions no longer receive any money from Hong Kong to support their ministry, and no news from the trustees about the updates of their properties. In fact, from the government records, we know that during 1920 to 1925, the Hong Kong government made multiple attempts to acquire the control on the German mission's properties in its territories. For instance, in 1920, the Hong Kong governor sent a proposal to London saying that let's grant the Ranish Mission Church to a Catholic mission in exchange for a leased land in the Catholic's possession. And then later on, he also suggests to the colonial government, let the government purchase the Berlin founding home forever so that we can redevelop the site. Fortunately, both suggestions was turned down by the colonial office, because they respect the Article 438 of the Peace Treaty. And they were devoted to the British obligation under the treaty. But it doesn't mean the end of the actions of Hong Kong government. In 1923, when the government drafted an ordinance, which is the German Mission Trust Ordinance, the wording actually were inserted to empower the governor to instruct the trustee on the sale of mission properties or to surrender the trust property to the government. Fortunately, these peculiar wordings were spotted by the Eagle Eyes Colonial Office staff, who insist to remove this wording from the final version of the legislation. One of them comments, it seems to me contrary to the spirit of the peace treaty and wrong in itself for state power to compel trustees to surrender trust property. So the governor at the end didn't get the power to acquire the German property by law. But it doesn't mean he stopped. Hong Kong government continued to bar the return of German mission to the colony, even when the plans for German missionaries to return to India and Africa were all well advanced. In July 1925, he actually came up with a very bold proposal. He said, let's just dispose all German missions properties in Hong Kong and return the proceeds to the 4 missions. He claimed that only the Basel mission want to return to the colony. But, he said, there was significant oppositions amongst the local community for the return of the Basel mission work. Well, that was a lie, because first, he claimed the Vanish Missions Church was vacant. Nobody's using it. That was wrong. He claimed no other missions want to come back. That was wrong. So it was Oldham, the secretary of the International Missionary Council, who wrote to the London, to the Colonial Office in London, and also the British trustees in Hong Kong, saying that you can't permanently remove German missions from Hong Kong. It would be a violation of the principle of missionary freedom. Also, not just Basel Mission want to come back. Vanish Mission, Hildesheim Mission also want to come back. So at the end, because of the oppositions of Oldham, the Colonial Office, and also the British trustees, the proposal for compulsory dispose all German missions properties did not go ahead. And because the Colonial Office didn't approve the governor's proposal. And the governor and Stephen left Hong Kong in late 1925. They were replaced by a new governor, Cecil Clementi. He has no interest in German missions. So therefore, he agreed to start the negotiation with the German missions on the assets, return the asset and the resumption of work in Hong Kong. But most important, why there's such a change, the property market in Hong Kong collapsed after the Great Strike, because at that time the cantons and Hong Kong's, there has been a great strike, just like what happened in UK right now, and the political stability and instability forced the market, the property market collapse. So therefore, it's just end. All this greed on properties end. So I do not have time to tell you more about the negotiation or the role of the British missionaries in the process, because it was they actually delayed the return of the German missions. You know, I hope that later on I can talk more about that. But right now I can only tell you it took a decade for the German missions to return to Hong Kong, decades after the war. So which is amazing, and I think. I would suggest that this is all because of the economic factor has influenced the decisions and the attitudes of the Hong Kong government. So this is the end of my presentation. I hope that I presented quite clearly. I hope so. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Iris. great presentation and the rich illustrations. You can also read up on what Iris said. I sent you the text of a presentation in the chat half an hour ago, so you'll find it. But thank you very much. That was a really great insight into what the work of the Basel Mission was like in Hong Kong at the time. And
thank you.
Before people start asking questions, I just want to know, to sort of get a bit of a image of what life was like at the time. Maybe you can shortly describe what it was like for Hong Kong's population to be under British colonial rule at the time that you did your research on. What kind of colonial government must we imagine that the British executed in Hong Kong? Iris, you need to turn on your mic.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I think it is important to point out why Hong Kong is different from other British colonies because of the way of governance. When Hong Kong was taken by Britain in 1841, it was barely just rocky island. There's only a few fishing villages, nothing more. Very few Chinese living there. It's only because of the development of the British colony, more and more Chinese comes to the island and form the population. I would say that these Chinese populations in Hong Kong, although some of them they mainly come here for the safety or the job opportunities offered by this place. Because remember, at that time, China was in great difficulties. There are a lot of chaotic violence and wars. So the British colony provide a relatively safe and a place of opportunities. But the Chinese refugees or the immigrants, they mainly came here for jobs. They still maintain the family contact with their families in the mainland China. In fact, I would say it is still the case right now. Many Chinese in Hong Kong still maintain the connection with their families in China. At that time, they stay in Hong Kong for a better life, more opportunities such as education and medical service, things like that. But in terms of cultures and language, they maintain their Chinese identity. I think this is important because because I think in some other British colonies, the local population actually adopt the language, or it is a bit different. It is different that in Hong Kong, the Chinese populations they stay in the British colonies. They were not how to say that. I mean, they work basically because let me say that the British took Hong Kong not because of its natural resources or the military advantages. It mainly because of Hong Kong's strategic locations as a free port. So that fact is the major driver of the colonial government. When it's governing the colony, the major issues is the security and the social stability. So therefore, unlike the case in India or in Africa, maybe the natural resources or would be what the colonial government wish to get. But in Hong Kong, it is not the case. It is the positions of Hong Kong as a service center.
Okay, thank you very much, Iris. That was a vivid illustration of life under British rule. Please, if you have any questions directed at Iris or want to have things clarified by her presentation, this would be the time to ask your questions. You can either ask them live by raising your digital hand, your virtual hand, or you can write them into the chat box and I will then put them to Iris. Yes, until people ask, oh, there is already something. Well, Iris, I don't know if you had time to check the chat box. There is Lars Lahmann who thanked you for your fascinating talk. You probably know each other, it seems. That it reminded him of your seminars at SOAS some time ago before COVID.
Yeah.
And now he wants to go back to his students. And then Wong Fuk Yi, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name correctly. He just wrote a comment on Claude 7, which was the last governor that you talked about. And he restricted the Peak District and South Cheongchao for Chinese people to settle, apparently. I don't know if you have a comment on this, Iris?
Yes, I think, thank you, Elder Wong, for raising this. The Peak District, which is actually I didn't mention, you know, what is the life of Chinese working in Hong Kong? Well, they work, they are hardworking, they contribute to the growth of the colony, but for the, as I said, the government has a deep concern on the stability and the security. So therefore, they impose strict regulation on Chinese populations. One is the segregation, which is what the Elder Wong described. At that time, above the peak area, which is above the top of the mountain of the Hong Kong Island, were reserved only for European residents. And Klaus Stephen at that time was the colonial secretary. So yes, he was involved in the making of the policy. He actually, Klaus Stephen, I can tell you that he is very close with the businessmen in Hong Kong. He actually so popular amongst the Taipans in Hong Kong. He actually wrote poems for the Jardins Taipan. So he's that kind of governor. He has a very good relationship with the local businessmen, property developers, things like that. So that explains why he was so interested in the German mission property, because it will make his friends rich and wealthy.
So that could also be one of the reasons behind the British government's attacks on mission properties, for example, the Basel mission properties in Hong Kong in 1990. Yeah,
I would say the aggressive attitude of the Hong Kong government towards the German missions was never because of the war, the nationalism, you know, the hate of the Germans, you know, things like that. Because just like, just even the colonial office staff wrote in the government records when they saw the proposal by the government, they say the Hong Kong government are hankering. They want to get the German missions properties for their own use. So it is not my observation, but the observation of the colonial office staff. They say it was understandable. Hong Kong, the Victoria City was too crowded. You know, the rental and the property price were too high. However, as a government, you cannot take the properties from German missions like that in such a way. So I think this is, as you said, the aggressions of the Hong Kong government was not because of the war, but the war gave them excuse or the opportunity to do that, because the property shortage problem becomes a headache to them. And now you have so many European buildings can be accessible. All you need to do is get their owners out of the territory.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this becomes very clear. Thank you, Iris. There is a question from one of our participants, Mr. Jan Martin Solic. Please, you have the floor. Maybe we can also see you. Yeah, there we go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Iris, for your interesting talk on this fascinating topic. And I also read your article in the volume by Frieda Ludwig. That was also very interesting. And that's why I was wondering if you could say something maybe also on the years after the return of some German missions to Hong Kong in 1927, how then if the break was really a kind of a caesura, or if they were able to work then again in a way as they did before in 1914. And maybe my second question, you always hinted to these very interesting letters and the interesting individual experiences. If you could maybe give one example, just one story or one case that you found really striking, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. For the first one, actually, about what happened after 1927. Well, when I would say that amongst the 4 German missions, the Berlin's women's mission didn't go back because it lost the property, it lost all the fundings. I must tell you that most of the fundings, even though it seems to be handed over to the British mission, the Church Missionary Society, however, most of them, either they grow up and left the facility, but in fact, I found the mission records indicate that many of these children were taken by the Chinese families. They used the word adoption, but in fact, at that time when girl servants are very popular in Hong Kong, they are called Mui Zai. They work in the wealthy Chinese families, but as little servants. So other than the Berlin's women's mission, the other 3 returned to Hong Kong. The Chinese churches already, because of the long isolation, they become very self-independent in terms of their management and financially also. But the return of the German missionaries are still very, very welcome by both the Basel Church and the Rhenish Mission Church. So the both missions send missionaries to Hong Kong and continue their mission work. But of course, later on, there's another round, which is the World War II. My study didn't go to that far, but I have to tell you that that is why now you have the Basel missions, and then the Basel mission German branch. It was what happened in the Second World War, but in the First World War, the Swiss and German stick together. So I'm sorry, I talk about other things. But come back to Hong Kong, I would say after the 1927, they basically they disposed some of their properties so that they have money to continue their work in China. But both the Basel missions and the Rhenish mission continue their work in Hong Kong, and so is the Hildesong Mission. They reopened the blind school in Hong Kong, and until today, the Ebenezer's blind school continue to serve Hong Kong's blind community, and very successful too. Regarding the second question, you say whether there are any story that impressed me the most in my research. I would say that actually this is not in this presentation. It was the story between the Basel Mission director and Oldham. It is between their friendship and their communication during the wartime, how they keep on writing to each other, even though it all sort of environments tells you that the others is an enemy. They are from the other, they are from Germany, or they are from British. But the two continue to work, and their connection is so important because the Basel Mission become the mediator between the German missions and the Allies missions. And only with that mediation, the subsequent arrangement to allow the German mission to go back to the foreign fields is possible. So I can't share which one is the most important, but I think maybe one of the letters they talk about the loyalty to the kingdom and the loyalty to the country. I think so touching because, both are partners in evangelical work before the war. But when their countries becomes enemy with each other, they find that they face a lot of difficulty to continue the friendship. So their discussions on whether we should, how to remain loyal to your faith. So therefore the others are your brothers, not your enemy. Or remain the loyalty to your nation, then you should not talk too much about your country or leaking information to the other side, right? So I would say that the correspondence between the Basel Mission's director and Oldham's during the war times are very touching and gave me the strongest emotions really during my work. I don't know whether I answer your question.
Thank you very much, Iris. I think the German interpretation no longer works. Christian, I don't know if you can do anything. Die deutsche Übersetzung funktioniert im Moment nicht. Ich kann auch nicht an gewisse Leute schreiben im Chat. Also irgendwas scheint da bei Zoom komplett falsch gegangen zu sein. Aber vielleicht können wir es nochmal einschalten, Christian, und dann sollte es vielleicht wieder gehen, rausnehmen und nochmal einschalten. Es geht leider nicht, tut mir leid. Geht nicht, das ist eben. Manchmal, es tut mir leid. I'm sorry, sometimes it doesn't work with Zoom. Okay, we have a few questions in the chat. Actually, I also have a long list of questions, but I'll keep it aside. It's always this way. The questions start coming in the last 10 minutes when we need to stop. So we're now Curtin Roberts asked if there was an ecumenical collaboration within Hong Kong during the period. Maybe you can give a very short answer.
Sorry, the collaboration between what?
An ecumenical collaboration between the different Protestant faiths, the different missions. Did they collaborate?
In Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, yes.
During the First World War?
Yes, during the period that you had a look at. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I in my presentation, I said the German Missions Church, Chinese church, were supervised by the British missionaries. So therefore, there have been collaboration between this German Chinese church and the Anglican Church, Chinese church. They together explore, conduct evangelical work in the new territories,
Iris, sorry, I'll just stop you here to give some technical advice. It seems that the German translation is now on the English channel. Die deutsche Übersetzung ist auf dem englischen Kanal. Irgendwie hat sich was vertauscht. Also wenn Sie jetzt Englisch anklicken, sollten Sie die deutsche Übersetzung hören. Okay, sorry, Iris. We have some technical problems. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So I said, yes, there were collaboration between the Chinese, German Chinese church and the Anglican Chinese church during the period when the Rhenish missions is under the supervision of the London Missionary Society. So they collab. For instance, one of the Chinese pastor of the Rhenish missions, he actually delivered Bible studies in the Anglican church mission schools. So you will say they actually work together as a team in evangelical work. However, I must say that they keep their Lutheran traditions intact during the mixture. The Hong Kong government tried to ask the Hakka Chinese church to merge with the Anglican church because you are both Chinese to them. You know, they say you are both Chinese. Why don't you integrate and merge? But the Basel Missions Chinese church reject the idea, saying that they want to keep their Hakka identity and also the Lutheran traditions. So therefore, I must say during that period, the two did have collaboration, but they stayed Lutheran in terms of tradition. I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Iris. I have 2 more questions and we have 7 more minutes left. So there was a comment of Adama from Indonesia who referred to the Basel Mission's work with the Hakka girls and women, which is also very interesting, and we weren't able to go into any detail there. And he refers to what you wrote, that they banned the child marriages and that changed the life of many Hakka girls, and that the schools were established and lasted until 1985. So his question is if there was any influence of the Boxer Rebellion, the Hanji Rebellion from 1899 to 1901 to this kind of work. He says that as far as he knows, the rebellion is against foreign people in China, or was against, or I'm not sure.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't think you mean the Boxer Rebellion. You mean the Taiping Tinguo, the Taiping Rebellion for influence on the church. Anyway, go ahead.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, there are 2 different things. I think for the Taiping Tinguo, Taiping rebellions, which happens in the very beginning of the mission work of the Basel Mission in 1850s around. So at that time, I would say the Basel Mission is actually one supporter of the Taipings in the beginning. Okay, there are stories about the Hamburg and the Taiping king, one of the Taiping king. Okay, but I think you say Boxer Rebellion, then I think you refer to around 1899. Yes, because at that time the Boxer Rebellions is targeting all the foreigners in China. So the all the foreign missionaries, they have to run for their safety. In Guangdong, the situation was less serious comparing to the north. But still, many missionaries left the mission stations inland and come to Hong Kong. And but I would say that there were not, I'm aware of any major problems or damages to the missions work during that period. Maybe they couldn't go back to the mainland for a while, but in a few years later they can go back. So there was not such a major problems. In fact, it would be the 1920s when there was the anti-Christianity movement in China. That was the real challenge to the Basel mission work in Guangdong. Their mission school was surrounded by many people, many Chinese, saying that, you know, one more Christians, then one fewer Chinese. That means, you know, please do not join Christianity, because if you join Christianity, we have one fewer Chinese. You know, this is a period of rising nationalism in China in 1920s. Yeah, so maybe I talked too much. So
thank you very much, Iris. There is room or time for one more really quick question, because we have 3 minutes left.
Yes,
at the end, and we want to be on time for people to be able to go back to work or do whatever they have to do. I believe, Paul Jenkins, you had a question. If you turn on your microphone, we can hear it.
Oh,
hello, Iris.
Hi.
Sorry, we get cracking. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you. But I want you to reconsider your simple statement that it was the economic reasons which allowed the German missionaries to return in the 1920s. And you really answered that already with that very eloquent thing you said about the relationship between the Basel mission director and J.H. Oldham.
Yes.
Is really how important are Christian idealists in politics. And
yes.
My suspicion is that if you followed up the presence of active Christians, including free churchmen in the British Parliament, you'd find out that the Colonial Office had to listen to them quite carefully in the 1920s.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. I think I cannot stress enough the importance of the what being done in by Oldham's and others British missions leaders in helping the German missions that they can come back to Hong Kong. I say economic factor is a factor shaping the attitude of the governor. I mean the Hong Kong government, but how they return was not an economic factor, but the unity between Christians in Germany and the rest of the world. So I think it is, I should end at that statement, which is the Christian unity is important in fighting against the world power, like in a case of a war.
Thank you. I think that's a very important last sentence.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Iris. We'll have to leave the fate of the Hakka girls for another time, for a next presentation, because that would also be really interesting to explore further. And you also mentioned that in your text. So if people want to follow up on that, you can do. Thank you very much for this fascinating talk and the wonderful slides that accompanied it. And I'm absolutely in awe of your career. Being part of the stock exchange and then moving over to history. So I think that's really wonderful. And please, Christian, can you just show the slide? Our next edition of the webinar series will take place on the 4th of May, and we'll go back to the African continent and we'll talk about the Basel Mission Trading Company, but specifically also about Swiss transnational trade in colonial times, together with Lea Haller, who you might know, who wrote a very important and good study on Swiss transnational commodity trade at the end of the 19th century. She's also the editor-in-chief of the NZZ History magazine. So do join us again. It will be in the evening on Thursday, May the 4th, 2023. And thank you very much, everyone, for your interest and for your questions. And I really hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you very much.